So if you decide your end goal first and then map out what it would take to get there, it's going to make it a lot easier, and then be okay to change your mind. I feel like we're different people every 2 or 3 years anyway. So maybe our priorities change and life happens.
Welcome to the Tech Guide podcast. I'm the show's host, Ryan Atkinson. Everyone is wanting to break into tech and have a successful career. The only problem is how. We'll use this podcast to sit down with people that have broken into tech, pivoted their career, or have actual advice to young working professionals. Today, we have Tiffany Dedeux on the podcast to talk about career plannings and goals you can establish. We talk about switching it from a 5-year plan to a 2-year plan. Love this part of the episode. How you can find what you want to do long term, and advice for finding your passion. A lot of us, we want to travel, we want to have freedom. Tiffany gives actual advice to actually putting those goals concrete and how you can actually get to them. So make sure to follow or subscribe to this podcast and share with any other friends that may want a tech guide. You can also learn more about us at techguide.org. We have Tiffany Dedeux on the podcast today. Welcome, Tiffany. Super excited to have you on.
Excited to be here.
There's going to be a lot of conversation about career planning during this whole thing, but I do want to ask about like a little bit of your early life, because you got your career started with like news stations, which I think is super cool.
Yes.
Before switching to career coaching, since you've worked with companies like Microsoft and a career advisor for Coding Dojo, you've been a career coach forever. Take me to being a news,
Feels like it.
working with take me to like the news stations though. Like, what has been something that you learned from your news station days that you've been able to apply being a career coach?
Oh, the career change from that time is also why it can relate to so many people, especially breaking into tech. But the best advice or tip that I ever learned is it's not really getting things perfect. It's about
Mm.
communicating when things aren't going to go well, and you could tell. So the communication is the key. So I like to share that with anybody that I work with.
I like that. Well, now, of course, I have to ask, like, take us to like the career pivot.
Yeah, the career pivot was because I'd reached as far as I wanted to go in TV news. As a video editor,
Mm.
was trying to be chief editor, but I couldn't see myself there for 20 years or whatever it was gonna take. So so I decided, you know what? This isn't the best place for me. I wanna break out and do something new. So I really just set up a sort of a career development retreat for myself, thought about what I wanted to do, and then decided the best opportunity was for me to take something that I heard about like a month or so ago previously from somebody in my network. And it ended up being a contract role, my first contract
Mm.
role, and my career for freelancing took off from there.
That's awesome. Take us to the career retreat. I'm curious, like, what can you just describe this career retreat and
Yes.
like how long it
Yeah.
was?
It was really, I had to turn off all my devices, which that part was hard.
Wow.
Like, I literally all I could scrounge up was, like, a 3-day weekend. I was like, "Okay, Imma do this." But I wanted to know what I wanted for my future, and I didn't want everybody else's voices in my head. So, no
Right.
TV, some music, because you can't live without music, I feel like that's required. And I just saved articles and journaled and thought about, like, what are the things that I want most out of what's next in my career? And sort of jotted some notes down, and by the end, I feel like, "Okay, I think I know what I want." And it was just a series of questions that I love TV, got out of the Actors Studio. I don't know if you ever watched Bravo,
Mm-mm.
but it the host asked a series of questions at the end to sort of open up everybody before he turns the actor over to the audience. And so I went through and I answered all those questions for myself. It was like, "What's your favorite word?" And I'm like, "Yes." "And what's your non-favorite word?" And I was like, "No." And so I clearly don't like to be told no. So there's
That's
that.
fair. So this, so what were like the questions, or like, was that like a question that you asked yourself on this career retreat to understand like where you wanted to go? Or like, what were some of the
Yeah.
questions that you did ask?
The most helpful questions and I altered them from the show, but it was like, what would be the best possible future for myself if money were no object? Like, those kinds of questions really opened up like, "Oh, I wanna travel, and I wanna do these things." And where I came out, from that was realizing I did wanna travel, I didn't wanna have to worry about if I was paying for it or not, and I wanted to just be creative and free with my work, and I decided I wanted to use Seattle, Washington State, as my career hub and travel from there, and I took a contract that let that happen, and so instead of me paying for trips, I didn't know this was gonna happen, but I ended up being paid to travel and train people how to use different software. And so sometimes you decide what you want and the universe delivers, and it may not be like you couldn't have planned for that. Like there's no movie
Yeah.
script that had that in there. So
That's
those questions opened me up to the possibility.
Yeah, so this retreat, you got really clear, it sounds like, on, like, what you wanted your career to be, and then you get this contract role to
Yes.
travel to set up, like, software.
Yes.
Tell us, like, what this role is, because I think a lot of young people, they traveling is huge for Gen Zs and, like, people my age, so, like, how did you get paid to travel? That's so sweet.
Yes. It's a contract role, which if I would have known ahead of time, I probably been a little more freaked out about. So sometimes taking the
Yeah.
leap is the big part. And it was on site at different locations. And this time it was TV news.
Mm.
So I got to go to different TV stations across the US, did one in Canada, and then across Australia, where I got to train them how to use the software. So that was my pivot that ended up to be more technical, but it used my background. So that's why I'm a big proponent of using your background to target roles in a new industry. And they
Mm.
just sent me wherever the station that signed up needed training, and I became a consultant, walked them through how to use the software, and that's how I got paid to travel.
That's super interesting. So, yeah, can you unpack that advice a little bit more about like using your background to like switch and basically break into a new industry? But it sounds like you're still kind of doing the same thing, or like can you kind of unpack that a little bit?
Yes. And I will start unpacking that by saying I actually now don't believe that there's such a thing as a career change. I actually think
Mm,
that it's just a different expression of what we already do. So for me, it was about storytelling. So I went from storytelling, video editing at a TV station to telling the story through software as a trainer, helping people to navigate that. I use the knowledge that I gained and the tips that I made for myself to learn software as a
yeah.
way to train other people to do it, and that made it easier to make the leap. And because I used
Mm.
my network, so as a friend that said, "Oh, you should try this." When I interviewed for this contract role, I thought I was interviewing, and I was like, "So what's next steps?" And he's like, "No, we're just gonna hire you. Here's the contract." I was like, "Oh."
Oh,
So the network got me in there, but it was because she could see how my background made sense, and I was comfortable taking that leap.
interesting. So this kind of goes into a question that I have. How should someone young in their career really like identify what they enjoy and like what they like to do? I mean, is there some sort of framework? 'Cause it's easy to say like, oh, I like podcasting, but like, is there like, how do you coach it? Like to understand like, what are you good at? What's your background? What can you strive in?
I look for what lights people up. When you get excited and your voice goes up and you start, like, talking 50,000,000 miles a minute, well, there's a clue there. If it feels like
Mm,
a chore, chances are you don't wanna do it. So I start people off with a bit of reflection, just note the things that make you wanna do it, that you lose track of time doing, and also, if it bugs you and you think everybody should fix it, that's usually a sign that you're the one called to fix it. Like you
mm,
have some gifts or talents there because you could see that vision. That also I feel like is a clue as to what you're interested in. And then I have people do different assessments, sometimes like
mm,
16 personalities, as in
mm.
16personalities.com. is a great assessment because it will break it down into a fun persona that also tells you who you are in your personal life and what you like in your professional life, and then use that as a guide.
That's super interesting. I want to talk about. I've done so many personality tests. I've done two.
Yeah.
I don't know why I said a lot. Or
Feels like a lot.
personality test. Yeah, that seems like a lot. Is there like actual sounds like such like a silly question, but like, is there real alignment between like your personality and like what people strive are good at in their jobs? Because like a lot of mine was like, I'm an ENFJ, whatever that is. And a lot of it was like salespeople or like teacher, like that type of stuff. Is there like real alignment there between your personality and what you're good at in your career? That's the sound, but
There can be, but I feel like it's up to the individual. When you read it, if it feels like it makes sense or it
Mhm.
resonates with you, I think that's a good sign. I will read the list of things it tells me that I could do. Like, I was always meant to be a teacher, but I'm not. I don't feel like I'm a dedicated teacher. I feel like teaching works its way as a skill throughout all the things that I do. So, it might be
Yeah,
like a guide or inspiration starting point.
interesting. And so how you give the assessment and like you understand to your like clients and like people you coach, it's like, hey, like here's what your background is, here's like your personality. What's like the next step from there? Is it then like identifying like, hey, like go get this job or like how like what's the next step after that?
I because I'm trained as a coach, it's it works for me to not, and this is what I love about coaching, to not tell people what to do because they're more
Mm,
invested if they decide what they wanna do, and plus the whole world is
true.
telling us what to do anyway, so I prefer not to be that person. But I will notice when people get excited when they talk about one aspect or we unpack what parts of the stuff, the job or a personality assessment they don't want to embrace, and then we're like, "Great,
Mm,
then you know what not to do, you know what to do." Then I have them go search job boards, their favorite job boards, mostly
mm,
LinkedIn, and I have them use keywords and not just job titles because that will open up the possibilities on what's out there, and then
mm,
have them read through and pick which ones excite them. They don't have to worry about applying because that's where all the drama, the internal drama and struggle goes. But if they start to identify what they like in a role, then we
mm.
could have something more tangible to work with.
Ah, interesting. So, and then take me kind of like through that then. Let's say like I identify like, oh, like I like XYZ job. Do you then coach the clients to coach them on like their resume and how to like stand out when you're actually applying to there? And if so, like what are some of the ways that you do that?
Yes, I take them through the whole process. Once they decide, yes, this is the type of role we're going to go after, I
Mm,
start talking them through their questions and concerns because some people are worried, do I have to go back to school? I don't want to go back to school. Or I think I'm qualified, or I don't think I have enough experience, or this job is weird. So, and I have to sell it to my family. So we talk through all of that. And then that prepares us to get to the resume. Um, since I'm a certified resume writer as well, we start building out that material and that content together. I'll write a draft if that's what they prefer, or I'll give them feedback and we'll talk through what should be included so that they can get their ideas down. And then we work on refining it for the job, but I find that writing to the job description is most helpful because otherwise it feels like you're writing to the universe and then you're trying to say everything
yeah,
you've ever done. And so you get the focus, you know, what tools and technologies and duties to make sure to include in your resume. And that helps refine and prepare them for interviews also. So I run the whole gamut of the job search.
interesting. Is there like software? Is there software out there? Like, how do you identify like the keywords that an employer might be looking for from a job description?
How I do it, and I've already listened to some of your other podcasts, so I know there's tips and tricks all the way nestled throughout. I actually have people go down to the bottom of the job description where the qualifications or requirements usually are, because that's where
I'm
all the
listening.
tools are. It feels like an open book test. So they'll tell you, we want you to know these programming languages and these frameworks. And work with people and have this degree and this certification. It's usually listed there, and you wanna make sure that those are included, so having a skills section in your resume is critical. I've worked with somebody who didn't even put Microsoft Office on their resume, and their network knows that they know this software, but they still didn't get pulled for the job because it wasn't on their keywords list. So, these little details
Inter-
make the difference, but then I also have people double check their resume against the job description using software like JobScan at jobscan.co.
okay. What is jobscan.com? This is one that I haven't heard of.
It's an online applicant tracking system, and it promotes an account, but you get up to 5 free scans a month, and I promise I'm not affiliated with them at all. It's just really
Yeah.
cool to, like, run your resume through, copy in a job description, and see, "Oh, I missed the fact that if I'm going for a user experience role, I said UX 5 times, but I didn't spell out user experience at all, so the recruiter's not gonna find me." So it will do that comparison for you and, like, flag you so you know, and you can fix it before you apply.
Interesting. I want to talk about the resume too, because you talked about one section that I personally don't have on my resume, but I've thought about including it is that skill section. So like what should one put in like a skill section? Because I've never done it on my resume. I'm curious, like, yeah, like what do you put in a skill section?
In the skills section, I usually break it into 2 categories. One would be the technical tools, so all the
Mm,
languages and platforms and all this stuff, and I put them in there mostly because that leaves the rest of the resume free to be more readable to the recruiter. Like, if you tell them what they did and you list 5 tools, I'm like, "I don't know what you did with these tools." So, separate section for the tools, and then instead of doing a soft skill section, I call it business proficiencies, just because business shows up a
uh,
lot in job descriptions, and or core competencies, I see some people do that. And then I'll put in there different skills like alternative words to job titles. So if you're targeting 4 or 5 different job titles, data analyst, data scientist, you get the other versions of those words in the business side of the skills section. So I would say business analysis, so you get both versions of the word, and data science, so that if the recruiter searches those words, then you have those in there as well. Other times I see people put in, "I'm good at communication," but in the job descriptions, I see written and verbal communication as a phrase a lot, so I now include that. So it's about what you consistently see that you could easily put in there that seems to be high value in the jobs when you keep reading and it says it like 5 times. So clearly it's important.
yeah. Well, you know what's crazy? Like having these conversations, it like really opens my mind to how much I feel like job applications like almost like a game. Like it's just kind of
It
optimizing like your
feels
resume
like
to
it.
like it feels like a game. And like this whole like game thing, I mean, like what are like some of the hardest things or like the hardest things to get right of this game? We shouldn't call it a game, but of the job process, like what is like the
If it
hardest
makes it
things
fun, call it a game. Otherwise, it
to
feels like a lot of work. Um, eh, the hardest thing about it is I feel like the hardest thing about it is writing for the 2 audiences. There's the recruiter first, and some of them, like, I've had them tell some of the job seekers I work with, "We like to see bling, we wanna click on some things, we wanna know what you did, we want all these keywords." And then the hiring manager's like, "I just wanna know your thought process." So, writing for the 2 different audiences feels like the biggest struggle and knowing what all to put in there. But once you do that, it's just about tailoring it for that opportunity, and I find people get too attached to what they used to do, that they forget that they could take that off and just focus on what they do well now and how they can do the job that they're applying for.
Interesting. Let's dissect that a little bit. So you just said you get like people worry about too much of like what they do, what they have done, but not like how this job, how what you've done like applies to this job.
Yes.
but word vomiting there. But talk about that. Like, so how do you write? So it's like, well, here's how my past experiences are relevant to this job. Is it keyword optimization or like, how do you approach it?
When I tailor the resume or encourage people to tailor the resume, that's keyword optimization. But when you first
Y-
decide, oh, I like this job and I'm going to apply, part of the thing I think is important is to recognize why you think you like this job, you can do it. Nobody sets
Mm,
themselves up for failure. So you clearly think you can do it. So the reasons why you think you can do it should be in the resume. Oftentimes when people aren't getting callbacks and I catch them with their diatribe on LinkedIn and they come talk to me, it's because they're like, "Oh, this would have been a shoe-in role for me." I was like, "Great, how
yeah.
do you know?" And they're like, I did these 3 things in my last job." I said, "Where? Is it in your resume?" And they tell me, "Well, okay, I forgot to put it in there." And so that's the part. Writing it for the job description can be so helpful because it reminds you of what you did. And if you only put that in there and how it positions you for success, you'll more likely get that callback.
I really like that. So we're winding down on time. I kind of want to hit on like one more bucket of like questions. And a lot of it's around like long term career planning and like goal setting. So can you talk to us like what are some ways that someone young in their career can like set goals effectively so they can do well in their career?
Excellent question. I find that people get the itch to change jobs every 2 years. So even though everybody asks the question, "What's your 5-year plan?"
Yeah.
You can have a long-term plan, and then I would say decide what the milestones are that get you there so that you could track your progress, also know when opportunities get you going in that direction.
Yeah. Decision making as in like why you took another like this job or that job or what type of decision
Yes.
making?
Absolutely. Like, why you went this route, versus this other route, why you took the contract role and not the full-time role? Because sometimes we doubt
Mm,
ourselves in the middle of walking out that decision. But when you
yeah.
write down why you chose one job over another, it can be insightful when you go back and look at it.
I love that. I like the thought of it too, of like, don't have like a 5-year career plan. Maybe yes, like have a 5-year career plan of like where you want to go. But
Mm.
like I like the 2-year career plan and then setting like what your end goal is. And for you in your example is like be able to travel and like have freedom from like your corporate job essentially.
Yes. Yes. I didn't even decide it was going to be software training, but it made the most sense because it built off of what I was doing previously and then
Mm,
allowed me to do the things that I really wanted to do in my life. So the aspirational goals, although you can do it in another way where it's the pay your bills job and then your passion job. It just so happens sometimes I get my one job is the passion and the pay the bills job.
interesting. So is that something where it's like you have to decide, do I want to have a job where like it pays the bills really well and like I'm like very not financially free, but like, it pays the bills
Yeah.
well versus like, oh, I'm gonna take like a passion job where like I'm probably paid a little bit lower, but like it's I'm passionate about it. How should people think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, and that's where the writing down the decision can help. If you
Yeah.
choose to take a role, say like nonprofit, some people go in the nonprofit sector and work for a cause, but the pay isn't always where it could be, say in the full on tech sector. So that's why some of the changes or career decisions are made. You can make it so that your job isn't your everything, which
Mm.
means that you can not expecting it to both pay the bills and fill your passion. That you can say, have the pay the job, pay the bills job, and then you volunteer in your spare time, and that fuels you. So you have both sides that you're expressing, and then you feel balanced.
I really like that because one of the topics I wanted to talk about was like basically what like how do you strike that balance? I want to talk about it a little bit more of like wanting to like strive and do like really well in your career and like get that promotion, climb the corporate ladder, or like whatever your end goal is with like a personal life. How should someone strike that balance?
They should decide what it means for themselves. Everybody's gonna have an opinion. So,
Yeah.
deciding in this phase, like when I traveled to Australia for 6 months on a contract, no kid, no family, nobody to answer to. I was like a backpack and let's go. So, there's times in your life when that's okay, and then if that's not the time or season in your life, then decide what is, knowing that it will ebb and flow, and that if you make your decision, decide that that's important enough to stick to it.
Mhm.
I can
I really
elaborate
like.
more, but that
Oh, yes, please do. Yeah, please elaborate a little bit more on like sticking that decision, like being with it. 'Cause I think a lot of people
yeah,
like they'll switch jobs a lot, but like, are you happy with it? Like, yeah. So talk about that a little bit more.
yeah. That part of that could be building in a check-in with yourself. Like on a job search, I have people check in on their job search trackers every 4 to 6 weeks. But with if you're doing a 2-year plan, maybe every year on your birthday or some kind of calendar or in the summer when it's nice and chill,
Yeah.
you actually think about, like, "Is this how I wanna be spending my time? Is the balance there? Maybe I do want more personal time to travel or work from anywhere." Then you make that intentional decision to go after what you actually want, and then you're more likely to achieve it than if you just bob up and down, say, on the river of life and let the
Mm.
employers dictate, like, "Hey, we want you in the office. No, you have to work here." Then you actually have a little more intention behind your decision making.
I really, really like that. And I think a lot of like people my age, a lot of us like value that freedom to like work from anywhere and like work whenever. That's why I see all these people with like, oh, return to office. And I'm just like, oh my God, that sounds like the worst thing in the world to return to an office.
Right
Cause I
now,
value
it
my freedom.
does, yes.
Yeah. I value my freedom so much. And I cannot even imagine returning to an office.
Yes, it has to be what you want. Some people I do run into are craving a little bit of community, so a hybrid
Yeah.
role is really the best for them. And also, when you're working remotely, I think part of what we lost with the pandemic was that commute time where you could switch on the job and switch off the job.
Yeah.
So there's different things that we learn about ourselves and what we prefer, but those are some of the questions that could be asked during the interview process or the networking process too, because not every company will allow you to work from anywhere. And that's important
Yeah.
to realize before you get committed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so, last question for you. This has been a great podcast, Tiffany. Just general career advice for young working professionals. They want to do well in their career, they want to go far. What general just career advice would you have for them?
To believe in themselves. And what I mean by that is everybody will always have an opinion about everything you do. So don't
Yep.
forget to check in with yourself and decide, is this really what works best for me right now? So that's the best advice I could give.
I love it. Well, Tiffany, you gave great advice throughout, actually. So, some amazing advice throughout this episode. So, thank you so much for joining us. A great episode on career planning, balancing what you want to do with long term interests. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.